This video marks the beginning of a new series in my continuing efforts to save Western civilization and to bring culture to the great unwashed masses. In this new series, I will be bringing my impeccable judgment and erudite wisdom to bear on the subject of great writers. Now, unlike my series on the composers, I will not be ranking these writers. I will simply be picking out some of my favorites and telling you why I enjoyed them and reading you some extracts from their work. I do not claim to have read all the great literature by all the great writers of all time. I do have other things to do, including making these videos. Now, I shall begin with the great American writer F-Scott-Fitzgerald. I call him the Mozart of American literature because his work has the kind of free-ranging, poetic quality of Mozart, as well as the range and depth of emotions you find in Mozart's music. Now, these are not qualities that I find in his much-praised contemporary, Ernest Hemingway, whose work I find rather dry and whose obsession with supermasculine pursuits like deep-sea fishing and bullfighting leave me cold. Those who have such a need to prove how macho they are, like Hemingway and Norman Mailer, among others, always make me wonder what they are trying to hide. In Hemingway's case, I just wonder whether it had something to do with the reason that he killed himself in the end. Anyway, enough about Hemingway. I simply mention him because he was regarded at the time as a great rival to Fitzgerald, although I do not think the two really bear comparison. They were very different writers in very different fields. There was great humor and great tragedy in F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings, just as there was in his real life. The old saying, "Be careful what you wish for because you might just get it," has particular relevance in the case of Fitzgerald. The two things he wanted most were fame as a writer and the hand of the Southern belle, Zelda Sayre. Until the publication of his first novel, This Side of Paradise, he had given up hope of winning the hand of Zelda Sayre. But the publication of This Side of Paradise brought him overnight fame as a writer, and the situation changed completely, and soon they were married. Unfortunately, Zelda was mentally unstable, and her delicate frame of mind was not helped by the wild parties and drinking of the Jazz Age, a name given to the era by Fitzgerald himself. It ended with Zelda dying in a mental asylum, while Fitzgerald increasingly sought refuge in a bottle, spending an entire decade in a drunken stupor, a period he later chronicled in the book The Lost Decade. After a frustrating time as a Hollywood hack, he died at the age of 44. Fitzgerald's early fame was bolstered by his frequent contributions to the extremely popular Saturday Evening Post, a journal that I greatly enjoyed as a teenager. His stories about Basil, an awkward and gawky adolescent, were particularly popular. Together with his first novel, This Side of Paradise, it provided the blueprint for one of the most famous novels of the 20th century, namely J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. A lot of movies have been made from Fitzgerald's writing, including Tender is the Night and, most recently, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button with Brad-Pitt. But none of them, in my opinion, really captured the heart and the poetry of Fitzgerald's writing. I am now going to read an excerpt from the first chapter of This Side of Paradise, Scott Fitzgerald's first novel, written when he was 21. In this opening chapter, we are introduced to Amory Blaine, the central character, plus his rather eccentric mother and his ineffectual father. Here goes. Amory Blaine inherited from his mother every trait except the stray, inexpressible few that made him worthwhile. His father, an ineffectual, inarticulate man with a taste for Byron and a habit of drowsing over the Encyclopaedia Britannica, grew wealthy at 30 through the death of two elder brothers, and in the first flush of feeling that the world was his, went to Bar Harbor and met Beatrice Ohhara. In consequence, Stephen Blaine handed down to posterity his height of just under 6 feet and his tendency to waver at crucial moments. These two abstractions appearing in his son Amory. For many years he hovered in the background of his family life, an unassertive figure with a face half obliterated by lifeless, silky hair, continually occupied in taking care of his wife, and continually harassed by the idea that he didn't and couldn't understand her. But Beatrice Blaine, there was a woman. Early pictures of her taken on her father's estate at Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, or in Rome at the Sacred Heart Convent, an educational extravagance that in her youth was only for the daughters of the exceptionally wealthy, showed the exquisite delicacy of her features and the consummate art and simplicity of her clothes. A brilliant education she had. Her youth passed in Renaissance glory. She was versed in the latest gossip of the older Roman families, known by name as a fabulously wealthy American girl to Cardinal Vittoria and Queen Margherita, and more subtle celebrities that one must have had some culture to have even heard of. She learned in England to prefer whiskey and soda to wine, and a small talk was broadened in 2 senses during a winter in Vienna. All in all, Beatrice Ohhara absorbed the sort of education that will be quite impossible ever again. A tutelage measured by the number of things and people one could be contemptuous of and charming about. A culture rich in all arts and traditions, but barren of all ideas. In the last of those days when the great gardener clipped the inferior roses to produce one perfect bud. In her less important moments, she returned to America, met Stephen Blaine, and married him. This almost entirely because she was a little bit weary, a little bit sad. Her only child was carried through a tiresome season and brought into the world on a spring day in '96. When Amory was 5, he was already a delightful companion for her. He was an auburn-haired boy with great handsome eyes, which he would grow up to in time, a facile imagination, and a taste for fancy dress. From his 4th to his 10th years, he did the country with his mother in his father's private car. From Coronado, where his mother became so bored that she had a nervous breakdown in a fashionable hotel, down to Mexico City, where she took a mild, almost epidemic consumption. The trouble pleased her, and later she made use of it as an intrinsic part of her atmosphere. So, while more or less fortunate little rich boys were defying governesses on the beach at Newport, or being spanked, or tutored, or read to from Do and Dare, or Frank on the lower Mississippi, Amory was biting acquiescent bellboys at the Waldorf, outgrowing a natural repugnance to chamber music and symphonies, and deriving a highly specialized education from his mother. That extract shows, I think, extraordinary sophistication and richness for someone who was only 21 when he wrote it. After that, he went on to write some of the most beautiful passages in English literature, or perhaps I should say American literature. Now, in my next video, I will be discussing a British author. Until then, au revoir and good reading.